our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witness for appearing as well. I'd like to visit with you about something a little bit closer to home, if I may. As you know, the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, was enacted in 1977. And as you know, it was enacted because of redlining, which impacted poor people and minority people for the most part. And as you know, there is now some talk of reforming the CRA to some extent. And it has been recorded that there is a desire to expand the definition of community development. I'm concerned about this, Mr. Secretary, because I have a good many constituents who believe that the CRA should be strengthened to aid more poor people. It seems that there is the possibility of adding business lending, some aspects of business lending, to the CRA such that banks can get credit for business lending. Tell me, where are we currently on the CRA and this reformation that may take place?
Well, first of all, I'm going to suggest that Mr. Otting comes to visit you to get your views on this. I firmly believe that this is something that we should take a new look at, because I think CRA can help communities much more so than it does. And this is something I was personally involved in from running a bank. I think that banking has changed, and I think we need to figure out how CRA really can help communities, and I'm going to suggest he comes and speaks to you about that, because I can assure you our desire on changing CRA is not about weakening CRA in any way. It's about making it more effective for communities and making sure that the benefits go to the communities.
Well, I appreciate what you just shared with me, and I look forward to the visit, but I do have to indicate this, Mr. Secretary. A lot of the push is coming from the banks, and the banks are back. The banks are doing quite well. They're making record profits, $167 billion annually over the last 3 years. Profits are up 135% since Dodd-Frank became the law. Business lending is up 80% since Dodd-Frank became the law. And the big banks will receive a $15 billion windfall in 2018 as a result of the tax bill. So I'm concerned that we're overemphasizing paperwork and the notion that the bureaucracy is creating a loss in some way for banks. Banks are doing quite well. And my concern is this: if we change the CRA such that business lending becomes a means by which banks will be able to acquire additional credits, that may harm the lending to poor people, which is what the CRA was envisioned as a means of helping by way of dealing with the redlining that was taking place. So I welcome the visit, but I have to ask you this. Before you enact whatever these changes are, I'd like to visit with you, Mr. Secretary. You are where the buck will stop. I'd like to have an audience with you so that you can know more about how this will impact my constituents. And by the way, I speak for a good many people who are not speaking on this subject, people across the length and breadth of this country who depend on banks being fair. So I beg that you and I would have an opportunity to meet and discuss this. I'm not a person who needs a lot of time. I'm fairly pithy and concise. I don't deal in small talk. I go right to the point. So I think that it would be beneficial for us to have this meeting.
Mr. Green, I'd be more than happy to meet with you. And again, I can give you my personal assurance that this is actually an issue that I've asked the regulators to look at because of my personal concern and experience that the money is not going into the communities where it should be. This is not an effort that is being driven by the banks to avoid CRA. This is about, in my mind, and we look forward to working with you, how banks better serve communities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida.